Welcome to my podcast where we are discussing the ethics in public relations and artificial intelligence. Martin Waxman, who is a digital and social media strategist and does some research in artificial intelligence, is joining me today. Martin, thank you so much for just coming on the podcast. And I'll just kick it off with, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do in comms and with artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. I love talking about AI and especially generative AI. Now, I do have a question to ask you. Did that introduction, was it generated by ChatGPT or you wrote it yourself, basically?
Great question. I wrote it myself.
Because I did a talk to my alma mater, McMaster University, the McMaster Syracuse Master of Communications program. On the weekend, we were talking about generative AI, and one of my former students kind of said, "Does this sound like you?" And she typed my name in. It wasn't bad. There were a few mistakes, but yours had no mistakes. Anyway, my background is really the agency side of PR. So I worked for a large global agency in Toronto, the Toronto office, started my own agency, merged that. And I got interested in social media early on, like around 2005, 6, early days of blogging and social media. And so my interest in artificial intelligence kind of followed on that. And this passion I realized I had for technology and how we can use technology, hopefully for good, but also in communication. So these days, I don't do a lot of traditional PR, but what I'm doing is looking at the relationship between generative AI and communications and how human AI interactions or relationships might change as a result of that. So that's pretty much, and I'm also a LinkedIn learning instructor.
Nice, nice. And you're also from the area or grew up in the area, you told me too?
Yes, I grew up in Winnipeg, so just north of University of Nebraska, Omaha, Lincoln, Nebraska. Have some great memories of visiting friends down there and going to summer camp. Also know that this time of year, it's a little chilly down
Yes,
there.
very cold. It's very cold. So I'm glad that you are somewhere not near here.
Yeah, Toronto isn't a lot warmer, but just a little.
For sure. Now I'll move along to my next question. There are many different definitions associated with AI, and it depends on the scope and the context of the project that's dealing with AI. But what would you say your definition of artificial intelligence is?
Well, my definition, and this is really based on a definition that IBM published, and it's a definition of narrow artificial intelligence, of which generative AI and all the text to whatever systems are able to do. And that is artificial intelligence is when a machine can perform human tasks at supposedly a better level than a human can. Now, that better level comes into question, but that's, I think, how I would define it as a starting point. Are we there? Mm-mm. No, I don't think so. But we're getting a lot closer.
Yeah, I like that you use the term supposedly. There's a lot of question behind that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But how do you see artificial intelligence being beneficial in today's society, and even good for the public relations profession?
Well, I'm going to talk specifically about communications and marketing because I think there are potential benefits in healthcare, discovering new drugs that could cure illnesses or new treatments for illnesses, spotting illnesses earlier, things like that. But in communications, I think it will change in some ways the way we do our jobs because all of a sudden you have a machine that can come up with ideas and write a first draft way quicker than any human can. Now, those drafts are riddled with mistakes, hallucinations where it makes things up, just, things that aren't true, but they sound good. So the grammar's good, the structure's good, it's really well organized. And I think one of the challenges everybody, but certainly communications pros face, is to be able to make sure that if you're using AI as an assistant, creative assistant, that you fact check everything closely, because it could cite a study and that study might not exist, but it sounds good. So we really need to make sure we know how to do that. I think it's going to change the workflow. I think it's going to change maybe the way we design things using text to image generators, possibly project management, analytics, sentiment analysis, but we need a human. It's an assistant, I think, not a replacement, at least not yet. We never, but it's very, very narrow because it bases its output not on emotions, not on feelings, not on knowledge, but on statistical predictions of what words fit together. And based on a training of a giant corpus of text called a large language model that's, taken from the internet, and some of it is good, some of it's bad, some of it's not truthful, a lot of bias in there, a lot of misinformation. And yet all it does is it doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. It just knows what fits together. So I think if we're using it, we have to go into it knowing that we need to establish guardrails and processes so that there's a human, one, managing it at every step of the process, figuring out where we're going to do it, and making sure that whatever we input into it, our data is safe.
Nice. And I like that you mentioned, Martin, that it should not be the sole operator of what you do in your daily life and career work-wise, because I feel like AI can be kind of scary when you think about all the things that it encompasses and how it can be a part of a comms job and gathering analytics, just different things like that. So you have to monitor, like you said, what it's the output of everything. So
yeah, absolutely.
could you talk a little bit about like how people can leverage AI in their work, and see it as maybe an opportunity? You just talked about like some of the threats there and what you can do to, I guess, protect the information that you're getting. But what are some ways that professionals can leverage this tool?
I think idea generation is a great one, especially if you're working for an organization or say an agency where your client is a beauty company and they have like the 30th brand extension on a skincare product. And you've done everything, like you've been working on it for 5 years, you've done a lot of things, and you're just out of ideas to do something new, possibly, if you know how to give it a prompt. And again, don't give away proprietary information. You could get some initial ideas that hopefully will let you go, oh yeah, we could maybe twist this around or shift it or change it and try something like this. So I think for ideas, it's really good. I think for social listening, sentiment analysis, and also picking up conversations, it's getting quite good at that. But again, you need a human there to know whether something is just people letting off steam, or if there's a potential issue or maybe a crisis on the horizon. So there's so many different ways we can use it. Now, there are, I read about a new app that takes notes. In a way, what you can do on Zoom, if you have Otter AI integrated into it. And so you have a transcript of a meeting, but what it does is it also summarizes it. Now you have to try, in case you can't keep up or you're distracted or whatever it is, you have to make sure that whoever releases that checks it to make sure that what it summarizes is truthful and it doesn't pick up the wrong points. So all of those things are things we'll need to know how to do. Also need to figure out how to become good prompt engineers, which is learning how to talk to machines. So kind of like Dr. Dolittle, right? Who talk to the animals. You want to be able to talk to machines, give them a prompt, that will, excuse me, that will get you what you need to know. And that's, comes with trial and error.
Nice. And next, let's talk about ethics. Now, some scholars and practitioners, see AI as a threat to jobs and humanity. I'm saying you can't automate relationships. But on the other hand, some may say PR should be given more critical attention, like you just mentioned, Martin, and question if AI technologies can be taught human behaviors. What do you think about this? And can you elaborate more on just everything that you just stated before?
Yeah, well, regarding jobs, I'm not an economist. I don't know if I think there's going to be some shift in jobs for sure. Hopefully it won't be job loss. It'll be just different types of jobs that we do working in partnership, with an AI agent or an AI application. I think in some ways we can automate organization, public relationships, unfortunately. And there's a lot of ethical issues, as you said, that go along with that. And if we look to science fiction, the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson as the voice of the operating system, that's an example of an automated relationship that really went off the rails. So you have to have guidelines and hopefully ethical principles in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Something similar, not quite the same thing, happened with Kevin Roose this past weekend.
Oh, yeah.
He was a reporter for the New York Times, and he had a 2-hour-long talk with Bing's AI called Sydney. He got it to admit it was Sydney. He got it to say and do all sorts of things, like talk about its shadow personality. That's a term Carl Jung coined to describe the darker sides of all of us that we try to hide. And Bing Sydney's shadow personality was quite scary. It said it wanted to hack computers and spread disinformation. It's like, and then of course it says, but this is all theoretical, because this is the way he framed it. At a certain point in the conversation, the chatbot is saying, I love you, and you've got to leave your wife for me. It was really a crazy interaction. Now, you could read that and go, is this thing conscious? But it's not. It gives you an example. Imagine if that happened to an organization. If I go on there, I just want product information, talking to a customer service chatbot, and all of a sudden the customer service chatbot starts saying, you got to leave your wife and spend all your time with me. That organization would have a crisis on its hands.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah. So what Microsoft did is they put in more guidelines. Apparently, you can't have long conversations with Bing anymore. No more than 5 turns, 5 questions back and forth. Then you have to start again. And no more than, you can't go to the application more than 50 times a day, which seems like a lot anyway, but whatever. So I think those are ethical considerations. Something else, this is according to a study done by Anne Gregory, who's a professor of communications in the UK, and 2 other colleagues. And what she found was that when an organization uses an AI agent as an intermediary, and that AI agent is pretending to be a human, or, kind of acting like a human, but all the time it's collecting data. And that it's using that data to maybe shift its persuasion techniques. And that's wrong, because it suddenly puts us, people, in a much more vulnerable position in our relationship between the organization. The organization, has more tools to manipulate us. So they advocate for transparency. I think that's really important. Anytime you're talking to a machine, you need to know you need to remember that you are. And I think you need to put guidelines, and this is where government and legislatures have to come in, on how much data you can collect and how much you can nudge me to purchase. Because if you just won't let me go till I buy something, keep manipulating me, I'm not necessarily in a position to say no. So I think that's a big, big ethical concern with organization, public relationships with an AI intermediary. I also think there are issues around bias. So algorithms that weren't trained on enough data, so they're giving biased answers, harassment, language that isn't safe, disinformation. Those are all big ethical concerns for everyone, but certainly for all of us as communicators.
Nice. And do you think that a machine could be taught ethics, empathy, and compassion?
Well, MIT has a project called the Moral Machine. And what they're doing is they're crowdsourcing answers to questions. You're driving in a car. If you swerve to the left, you'll hurt yourself, maybe injure or kill yourself. But if you don't, you'll run over a person or a mother with a child. What do you do? And so they're trying to do that. I haven't heard, this goes back a few years. I haven't heard any reports as to whether it's been able to do that. There's another one, I think Oracle has a platform called Delphi, DELPHI, which also is looking at ethical questions. You can ask the machine an ethical question, but again, it goes off the rails. And until we can make sure that it gives the kinds of answers that, one, put people first, beneficial to humans first, we can't let it out into the wild, and we need to use our own value system. And hopefully we have one, but to make those ethical decisions.
Nice. And since people challenge how AI can be taught human behaviors, and especially in communications, what values do you think should be embedded in the technology?
I think some of the values are that it won't, and this goes back to Isaac Asimov, it won't harm us. So it won't use the data it collects to harm us or to manipulate us in a way that it shouldn't, that it should be there to help us. Now, how do you code that into a machine? I don't know, because that's really complex. I'm not a computer scientist. And I think we need to make sure it's transparency, as I said, authenticity, let people know what's going on and remind them, in this conversation that, okay, remember, you're talking to a machine, gathering data on you, just so you know that, like, I'm here to help, but here's what I'm doing. I represent organization X, just to keep it top of mind for us. But, again, it all comes down to putting people first. Now, do companies do that? There's a tough question.
Yeah, that can be challenging to think. And yeah, that was my last question. Anything else you'd like to add?
I think one thing I want to say is, as communicators, we're not trained in computer science. We're not trained really in math. And so when we read about artificial intelligence, we have this image of what we've seen in science fiction movies, TV shows, read in science fiction books like Arnold Schwarzenegger, knocking at your door. That's not where we are. And I think it's incumbent on us to educate ourselves on what AI is and does, how it works, what some of the ethical challenges are, what the good it can cause, how it can help us, how it can hurt us, and start to participate in those conversations at a strategic level. And there's a really great book that I'd like to recommend that your listeners read. It's called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You by Janelle Shane. It's a humorous look at narrow AI and various algorithms and what they do and where they go off the rails. And she wrote this in 2019. And a lot of the errors that are getting press, that ChatGPT is doing right now or Google's Bard did when it was launched and made a mistake, in one of the questions it was demoing. She wrote about back then. So it's an easy to understand way to get a handle on AI. And that's a good starting point. You Look Like a Thing and I Love You by Janelle Shane.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Martin, for joining me today on the podcast. It was just so great to hear from you about AI and comms and your insight and expertise there. So yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. And if anyone's interested, follow me on LinkedIn or check out my Digital Marketing Trends newsletter on LinkedIn, in which I cover a lot of trends and challenges and opportunities related to AI.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin.
Bye.